everybody. If you could turn off your cell phones and make sure to fill out the forms afterwards, that'd be great. Everybody loving that ordering on the word order? Does it bother anybody? Yeah, it's kind of awful. Right, cool. All right, so my name's Nathan Fouts. I'm from Mommy's Best Games, and we're going to set this game in order. So we're going to look at ways to organize levels and lots of mechanics, and what can happen when you have a game that's got a lot of stuff to keep track of, and what you should be doing to manage all that. But before we get into that, we're going to talk about some basics of difficulty curves, level design mindsets and ways to think about level design, and some examples of games with lots of mechanics, and then some possible solutions. So back in 2007, after working in AAA for a few years there, I ended up going independent with Mommy's Best Games, and we made a lot of shoot 'em ups over the years there. And we made Shoot 'One Up, and that got us recognized by Devolver Digital, and we got to make a Serious Sam game for them in 2D called Serious Sam Double D XXL. And I created the idea of the gun stacker. Sam gets to stack his guns one on top of the other to shoot the bad guys. That game had 40 weapons and over 20 levels, and it was already starting to get to be a big mess. I love to use this promotional art. I never get to use it, so it's silly. There's a teacup stacker? I don't know. So in 2013, I began working on what would be our biggest game yet, called Pig Eat Ball. It is a classically styled kind of arcade adventure game. It has hundreds of levels, lots of bosses, a story. It's non-procedural, all handmade. And it had a whole bunch of stuff to keep track of, and it's like 6 to 10 hours long, so there's a lot of stuff going on. So I was trying to figure out, how are we going to keep track of all the mechanics? How do I know what everything is in the game? How am I going to balance my difficulty curve there? So in any game, this is a 2D game, but it still applies to the bigger 3D games. How do you keep track of if someone changes a mechanic in the game, changes one of the enemy types, if they add a new one and you want to insert it into the middle of your game? You shouldn't be testing a 10-hour game every time something changes, right? So you should know where those enemies show up in the game. So that's the kind of problems I wanted to get into, and I talked to other designers about solutions over their years. So before we get into all that, we're going to talk about some level design mindsets and difficulty curves. So if you wanted to plot out your difficulty curve, you'd probably start with something where the game gets harder when the player gets to further into the game, and get a nice upward slope like that. And if you're a masochist, maybe you're going to make a game get immediately hard and then stay to super hard the whole time, like Super Meat Boy or something like that. I like this idea of, I call it the heartbeat curve. So it's a gentle slope, but it has periodic spikes and dips in it. We'll zoom in here on that. And the idea is you start out with and introduce a mechanic, and it's a super easy to play level. The player can't really fail, they just get used to the idea. Then you start to twist the mechanic and add little changes to it and slightly challenge the player further along in the levels. And then finally, there's a big spike in the difficulty. It's not terrible, but it's there, and the player gets a rush, and then they accomplish and they beat the mid-boss or the boss, and it's a big spike there, and it feels good. And then you start over, but it dips way down. So the difference is really sharp, and the player gets a big, full relief feeling, and they feel like they really accomplished something cool. And then you introduce a new mechanic, and the whole process starts over there. So that's my heartbeat curve. There's also a really good talk on the GDC Vault for free about the game called Jelly Splash. They have a whole different take on the difficulty curve. It's a mobile game, it's really popular. It's probably designed to teach you how to just vacuum cash out of players' wallets. You should go look at it, it's really smart. So when you're thinking about difficulty curves, there's the concepts of puzzle difficulty and skill difficulty. So puzzle difficulty is the idea of how hard is it for a player to figure out what to do, and the skill difficulty is how hard is it for them to execute it with their hands in the controls. And you could actually probably plot both these two on two different types of difficulty curves for your game. So now we're going to shift into design mindsets, just some overviews of different ways to think about level design. So that's BioShock there, of course, and this is an idea of environmental storytelling. It's the kind of the idea of the player asking, what happened here? And then thinking of what happened there. And there's a really good talk on the Vault called What Happened Here? It's from 2010, you should check it out, it's excellent. Another cool game that's really big with environmental storytelling was Hyper Light Drifter. It's just the idea of the player looking and them telling the story without being explicitly told what the story is. So kind of related to that, I'd like to think is set piece design with the Call of Duty series and others. You kind of take like a basic gameplay, simple of shooting guys and maybe not a lot of enemy types, but you really dress it up with these huge environmental set pieces. The Golden Gate Bridge and America Explodes, that kind of thing. And it really adds a lot of flavor to what would be kind of a normal kind of gameplay. So another type is what I like to call transcendent level design. I really like shoot 'em ups, and in bullet hells, there's like these curtains of bullets, and I talked to a player, he had a really good quote. He said, bullet hells are like that moment when apparent chaos becomes perfect order in your mind. It's just a different way of thinking. And related to that is racing games. You even like Rez or Thumper or the Wipeout series. And one of the games in the Wipeout series, Wipeout Fusion, even had a mode called the zone mode, where you have to loop the levels as long as you can, getting faster and faster. It's just a different way of kind of building your levels. And the final design type is mechanics-driven or modular, which is the one I'm going to focus on today. It's that Super Mario Galaxy there. I mean, look at that. There's just like so much going on, right? You can interact with all of it. There's the lily pad, the water, the bumblebee power-up, the one-up. You're probably thinking about hopping on that flower in the background, the purple thing, right? It's all really cool stuff. And there's a lot of games like that. Super Monkey Ball has some cool, a whole bunch of puzzles like that. The Rayman series, the new stuff, there's like those little fireflies to grab, the lily pads to hop on. Everything's interactable and it's really interesting. So on my own game there, this is our upcoming game, Pig Eat Ball. If you look, there's bowling pins, conveyor belts, cue sticks. There's a lot of stuff going on. It looks really busy, but the player gets introduced to these slowly. And this sort of game just lends itself to lots of levels and lots of mechanics because you want to introduce all these mechanics nicely. Here's Marble Saga Korra Renpa. I mean, look, there's scissors in the background. They get a level, right? There's that diamond. There's pinball bumpers. Here's Ape Escape 2. There's that cool silver slope your eye's drawn to. Then there's little gold pickups, crates, the apes. They all get their levels, and they all get slowly introduced in these huge games. So I'm talking about introductions and not tutorials. Tutorials sound awful, right? You put that at the beginning of the game and everybody hates it. Hopefully, you guys don't even have to do that. You should be able to introduce mechanics slowly and flesh out the mechanic and give it its own nice little area in a bigger level or its own little level. This is Super Mario Galaxy 2. This is the Fluzzard level. It's far into the game. It's World 2, Area 2. It's a whole little mini game of tilting the controller. It just makes the game feel so much more polished if you give your mechanics some room to breathe between all the other stuff you got going on. Just do a nice introduction. Ape Escape 2 is another favorite of mine. Here's the super hoop mechanic. So you spin the right thumbstick really fast, and you can actually run up those sharp slopes. So that silver slope on the other screenshot, this whole level is the level they introduced the super hoop mechanic in. It's all this Spanish tile. And so now it's a nice area to play in. The whole level's built around it. But from then, that point on, anytime you see those slopes, you know what to do. You're like, okay, great, I got this super hoop mechanic, I'm going to use it. Which brings me back around to our own game, that Pig Eat Ball that we're working on. So the gameplay mechanic starts with, what if Pac-Man could get fatter while you ate? Then it ends up kind of turning all the levels into a bit of a puzzle. I had to do an actual Pac-Man homage, of course, but in this game you can barf on the ghosts and eat their skin off. It's cute gross, right? It's not terrible. Okay, so we start with that, and you still have to eat all the balls in the level, but now you can get stuck in the maze, and there's a lot of barf that's in some parts. But then we expand to that, so I'm going to walk you through a couple of the cool mechanics we introduce in there. So in World 2, there's an idea of the polarity cats, and they are like lucky cats, but there's a gold one and a black one. If you break the gold one, you just smash it apart and you can pass through that spot. If you break the black one, it explodes and hurts you. So we give the player a nice little level to play around with. The damage in this level doesn't affect the end goal, so they're free to goof off with it. And if you notice, what happens is when you break any of the cats, they flip polarity. Gold goes to black and vice versa. We do that because then later on, of course, we want to get into more interesting levels. So this is like a looping level where they're on a track and the cats are blocking off these balls that you have to eat. As you pass it around and you keep eating balls, you're getting bigger and bigger, and at some point you're going to run into a spot that you might have screwed up and caused the black cat to be in your way. So that's more of like a puzzly level, but again, we introduced it nicely before so the player could get their mind around that. In the game, there's these silly little creatures, the pill bugs, and they cause you all kinds of grief. There's all kinds of different types of them. This is a glutton pill bug, and he loves to eat. So we basically make sure that you start out with a level you're sure to be able to beat, even though it's strange and confusing. You perturb the balls, they hit the conveyor belts, and the glutton bug gobbles them up. Turns out he turns into a giant bowling ball of sorts. You know what the bowling ball is at this point in the game, but you've never seen him before, but you know you can't get through bowling pins without something. And there you go, you're able to solve it. Later on, we get into really big, complicated levels, but you know what all these mechanics are as a player at this point. The player's in the middle, the glutton bug's on the right, and then we've got super crates on the left, which you have to be fat enough to break. There's spike walls, there's bowling pins, there's jelly blocks, there's barf goblins. All that makes sense once you play the game. So you're trying to get into the glutton bug there, but you can't reach him yet. You're eating the jelly blocks and you're going really fast, and you make it to, oh, the barf goblins. I can barf on those. They love it. Don't worry. It's fine. They love that. So, and then they fly away, and you can get into where they were blocking off some balls, and then you get bigger and you get into more and more sections, and the player can kind of like red paperclip their way through the levels. So all this is possible because of the level editor in the game, which we do ship with the game. I loved the Mario Maker. I thought it was great. I thought it had a few little UI problems, which I tried to address, but we try to make our level editor super nice. There's our object palette. It's very inviting. And basically, you're able to real easily play around with, goof off with all these weird new mechanics we got in the game. You can share your own levels with friends. You can share them with the world, daily featured levels, all that kind of cool stuff. There's beer. I'm sure we'll have to rate that or somehow for kids, but there's consequences when you drink the beer, so hopefully it'll be okay. We're going to talk about how methods we've looked at to organize all this stuff in the game. Before we get to that, though, let's assume together that better tools are going to help you make better games, right? I'm sure somebody could make a house without a hammer and a saw, but it wouldn't be great, right? It'd be better with tools. The same thing here. You're probably using Unity or Unreal or something like that to help you along, but consider that you might even want to write some own custom tools for your game, even if you're a small studio. So, the easiest thing we can all use is paper, right? The cool part about paper is it's 2D. So if you're making a 2D game, you can rearrange things and really easily balance things. That's great. But it's hard to share. You can't share it over the internet. It's not computer searchable. It's not ideal, but I'm sure we've all started there. I talked to Radu Marison. He's working on an upcoming puzzle game called Semispheres, and he used paper to balance his game. He actually printed screenshots on his business cards and were able to lay them out and rearrange his levels that way. The problem, of course, is when he adds new levels, he's got to reprint his cards again to keep going. So he ended up digitizing that in a program that's free that you guys could use called Inkscape, and he's got all those little slides and levels there that he can rearrange now and look for a better difficulty curve. I like to know what's in my levels because we got so many levels going on, I want to see what's going on. So early on, I tried using Windows search, like that folder search function that we all have access to. And it actually works. It's not the best thing, but the way you got to do it basically is have a level format that's text-based. You have objects that have a word that you can search on, and then you just tell that it's indexed to build. You have to rebuild the index on that folder. It does work, but it can take hours to rebuild all that kind of stuff. So then if you change the levels, you have to rebuild the index again. So it's not ideal, but it's there and it's free if you have Windows. Now, something I hope everyone's using, if you have any number of things to keep track of at all, is some sort of online docs or sheets method. Of course, there's Google Docs and Google Sheets. This is really powerful and really useful. This is a screenshot of our, just a little clip of our world where we keep track of the world, the level file names, the level titles, the goals, and the meddling times on getting gold and silver. The problem with Google Docs is that you got to update it. And I don't know about you, but I get a little lazy. And then I have another designer that lives in a different state, and he's supposed to see what I'm doing and vice versa. And he doesn't always update it. It's critical. You should still use this, but it has some problems in terms of use. So I talked to another designer, I think he's here at the show, Austin Borden at Rare Sloth. They're making a big puzzle game on mobile called King Rabbit. It has 512 levels, and they use it to see what kind of mechanics they're introducing for each world. Real simple, real nice, but it definitely helps them out. Now, Unity Analytics. You probably are using something like that. I talked to a different designer, and he is using his own custom system for analytics that sounds intimidating, but it's not that bad. Stuart Denman is working on a new puzzle game called Tiny Bubbles, where you were able to pop the little bubbles to create this chain reaction to solve the puzzle. He still stores his analytics like most of us, but instead of a funnel, which is kind of junk in terms of seeing what's going on, he plots his own map. And he stores the number of times somebody quits the level and the number of times they had to replay it to beat it. Look at that gorgeousness. Take it in. You can see exactly what's going on in his game. The red are problems. Or are they? Take control of your difficulty curve. Maybe he wants those spikes there, but he knows that they're there now. It's really cool to see. Stuart's at the show as well. His game's coming out in a little bit. You should check it out there. Now, an older game, I talked to the guys that did Where's My Water with Tim Fitzrandolph. And they used paper way back then, but it served them pretty well. They would print out screenshots of the Where's My Water puzzles and rearrange them as they needed to balance. But they also did this really cool solution where they had multiple designers working on hardware on iPhones and iPads, and the devices could look at a shared Dropbox folder, and they could hot change little level fixes without going through the entire build process, which is kind of a pain in the butt for mobile. And multiple designers could work off of all this together. That's something to think about. He said it was a little janky, but it worked. In our own game, Piggy Ball, we do have the level editor, and we've now got an in-level editor searchability for all the objects and mechanics we have in the game. And you could search for that glutton pill bug now, and it filters all the levels that contain that one object. And then you could also filter by world, by goal type, or anything like that. So here's another one where you could actually filter and combine the filters together to even see more of where the levels line up together. So I'm working with John Meister from Super Soul. He's in Kentucky, and I'm at Mommy's Best in Indiana. And we're working together on the game, and he's the one that implemented a lot of these cool features that I requested. The other thing he changed was we now have Google Sheets export. So the whole problem about being lazy about not updating your level data is now gone because we get fresh level data as we build the levels. And what's cool is you don't have to be in the game to see this. Anyone could just get in on the team, could get on the Google Docs and just check out and see what's in the levels. And you can even look at this heat map of objects in the levels. The way they built that was through, as the levels are loaded, they would count up all the objects in the level and the level data, and then store it out to an XML, and then parse that. It really wasn't that bad, and John Meister's here at the show as well. I talked to another designer, Ian Stalker, of the Scapegoat series. He had this really cool grid arrangement tool. His level where the players play through the game to find levels, this is a little sketch. It was a 2D grid as the player made their way through the game. So he made this extra little tool, it wasn't terrible, where there's the live part kind of in the middle, and he could drag and drop levels into there and rearrange that based on playtest feedback to get a better feel for how players were having problems or drop levels that weren't working. But he had control over that really easily rather than just having it hard-coded in or something. I talked to another team, this little indie team, making this game called Candy Crush Saga. Jeremy King from King, he gave a talk a couple years ago on how Candy Crush Saga was built. And there's some really good nuggets of information inside there. They have an internal tool called the Level Library. And they store the screenshots, the designer, and the difficulty rated by the other designers of that level. And they can rearrange the levels as well. But it gives them a little leg up on what they think it's going to be like for players at the end. They also use Google Docs. They have a beat chart for where they're deciding to introduce new mechanics there. I'm not sure if Jamie's at the show there, but he was a really nice guy, and you can contact him for any questions as well based on his talk there. But I thought it was neat that even they use this kind of thing. Catherine Neal gave a really cool talk called For When Spreadsheets and Flowcharts Aren't Enough. It's actually a talk about tools for game design, not really production, but it was really interesting and that's another one that's free on the Vault. And you're probably asking like, oh gosh, does my game even need this? Well, I like to think of if you have more mechanics or levels that you can count on 2 hands, and you've got at least 2 people on your team in different areas, you should be keeping track of it somehow, not scribble down on a piece of paper, so that everybody can be on the same page. So we talked about the level design mindsets, the difficulty curves and the heartbeat idea, and about making custom tools themselves. And right now, you could be using spreadsheets, you could use Inkscape. I didn't talk about Trello, but I'm sure a lot of you know about it, but you could be using that to keep track of things, and it's nice to rearrange. There's paper, there's even window search. But hopefully, you guys are gonna think about the idea of doing some custom tools for yourself, even on your smaller teams, and how it could help you out. I'm Nathan Fouts from Mommy's Best Games. That little URL there in the middle links to all the information in the talks I covered. And Piggy Ball is on Fig. It's like Kickstarter, but only for games. If you guys could back it, I'd be eternally grateful. And thank you. And afterwards, all the level designers are gonna go over to the Marriott Marquis in the lobby and hang out for a little while if you wanna chat and talk. And if anybody has a question, you can do a question. Yes?
So I was wondering if you could talk about any mishaps that you had happen with your mechanics and levels before you had your organization methods set, like any problems that came from not having these tools yet.
Right, yeah, so if there's any problems, what did all these tools solve? We've been working on Piggy Ball for 5 years. It's a big action puzzle game. I lost track of mechanics. There was gameplay objects that I forgot I didn't even have or didn't even use, and I found them. That's a ridiculous example, but it's true. The big thing you should be able to get out of this is difficulty balancing. Like I said, take control of your difficulty curve. So that should help. Yeah.
Hi, good talk, by the way.
Thanks.
I'm a student right now for game design, and I was curious if you're just using all these different methods for building your whole design, or are you actually making, like, say, a full game design document for your games and then using these as add-on additions?
My method is ad hoc, and so I do start with the game design, but then I get a lot of ideas from iteration with tools. And I always say, you're gonna make an interesting game out of different tools. So whatever custom tools you'll have, you'll end up with something different. So for me, they go together. Like, I can't imagine planning something and sticking to it. 100% all the way to the end, that sounds incredible. So that's what I got, man. It's a mixture.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. That was really interesting. My question is, with so many different game mechanics and introducing those and the interactions between them, when you're adding new mechanics and all the possibilities, how do you explore those, the different possibilities, and if new people join the team, how do you convey them efficiently to the new members?
How do we decide what new mechanics are, what and where they go? Well, first of all, everybody that joins a team that's on the production side should be playing the game. So that should get them into something. And then where the new mechanics go, it comes down to what kind of physical work the player is going to have to do, like, to understand that new mechanic. So it's like breaking a thing like those polarity cats. They're in World 2 because all you got to do is just break a thing. And then your mind has to understand what they do. But like that glutton bug, you have to like feed it and then think of where it goes and then take it there. So I would say it's combined with that, balancing your puzzle and skill difficulty. For those two are kind of like magnified suddenly, I think that mechanic should go further into the game for what you're expecting out of the player.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks. Cool, thanks guys.